The Ohio River just dropped to 5% of its normal water volume, the lowest reading the Army Corps of Engineers had recorded in history. It is not just a river crisis anymore. 5 million people drink from this river. Towboat operators on the Ohio had to disconnect from their barges, push walls of ice out of the way by hand, then reconnect and keep moving because the water was too slow and too shallow to break through on its own. The United States Department of Agriculture declared 8 Ohio counties a natural disaster area. Barge operators slashed tow sizes by 14% and draft depths to 10 feet 6 inches, choking the artery that moves 225 million tons of cargo a year. Downstream, the Mississippi River near Baton Rouge fell 10 feet below average, and for the third consecutive year, the Army Corps built an underwater sill near New Orleans to hold back the Gulf of Mexico from poisoning the city's drinking water with salt. 2 nuclear reactors at Beaver Valley Power Station in Pennsylvania draw their cooling water directly from the Ohio. Paducah, Kentucky, the city that sits where the Ohio meets the Tennessee, just recorded its driest winter in more than 130 years of measurement. But here is the detail that tells the real story. In Cadiz, Ohio, a small village in Harrison County, residents spent more than a month under a boil water advisory after the drought then flood cycle cracked the concrete filters in a treatment plant that was already failing. A resident named Stacy Greer started filling gallon jugs from her tap and testing the pH herself because no one else was doing it. A consultant told the village the repairs would cost more than $2 million. Cadiz does not have $2 million, and the water coming out of the faucet is still not right. Here is what led to this. The Ohio River stretches 981 miles from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Cairo, Illinois, where it empties into the Mississippi. It is the second largest river in the United States by volume. Its watershed drains parts of 15 states, and it normally contributes half of all the water in the lower Mississippi River. Half. When the Ohio dries up, the entire inland waterway system of the eastern United States begins to fail. By late summer 2025, the trouble was already visible. Drought had expanded across the Ohio River basin, and by mid-September, the Ohio was contributing just 8% of the Mississippi's total flow. Not 50%, 8%. Negative gauge readings started appearing at stations along the middle Mississippi, which meant the water surface had dropped below the 0 reference point set when the gauges were installed. Then winter arrived, but it brought no relief. Waylon Humphrey, Chief of Operations for the Army Corps' Great Lakes and Ohio River Division, told reporters in early February that the Ohio was running at roughly 20,000 cubic feet per second. The typical flow for that time of year is 400,000 cubic feet per second. He said they were dealing with the combined crisis of extremely cold temperatures causing ice and extremely low flows at the same time. The river was so sluggish that ice formed on it like a lid. At Willow Island Lock, the miter gates could not close because ice had packed into the chambers. 16 staff worked around the clock flushing it out. Delays at that single lock stretched to nearly 3 days. And this is where it gets worse. The Ohio River is not just a shipping lane, it is a drinking water supply for 5 million people across 29 public water utilities. Cincinnati draws 88% of its water from the Ohio. Louisville serves roughly 1 million people from the same source. Cities such as Huntington, Parkersburg, Wheeling, Evansville, and Paducah also pull water from that river. All of them pull water from a river that was running at 5% of capacity. Here is the problem that is not making headlines. When a river slows to a crawl, the dams that regulate it stop creating a flowing river and start creating a chain of standing pools. Greg Youngstrom, an environmental scientist at Orsanco, the Ohio River Valley Water Sanitation Commission, said this: "When there is no rain, the water slows down in the river. The dams hold back water to allow for navigation, and the river becomes very close to being a series of lakes. And lakes breed algae. In August 2025, Orsanco and investigators found visible green water and microcystis colonies stretching from Markland Dam all the way to Paducah. Dissolved oxygen at Markland plunged to 3.82 milligrams per liter, dangerously close to the threshold where fish suffocate and die. In 2019, toxic blue-green algal blooms covered a 300-mile stretch of the Ohio and forced Louisville Water to treat drinking water for 6 weeks straight. But that was only half the collision. 20 miles east of Cincinnati, on the Ohio River floodplain in Pierce Township, sits the former Walter C. Beckjord coal-fired power plant. It closed years ago. What it left behind is 6 million cubic yards of coal fly ash sitting in unlined ponds directly upstream from wells that serve 130,000 people. The ash contains lead, mercury, and arsenic. During drought to flood cycles, groundwater levels swing violently, and that pressure pushes contaminants through the ash and into the aquifer. Pierce Township trustee Alan Freeman put it bluntly. "This is something that should scare the hell out of everybody," he said. "That pollution is sitting there right next to your water." Now pull back. The Ohio River carries between 179 and 225 million tons of cargo per year. A 15-barge tow replaces 1,050 trucks. The economic impact of Ohio's inland waterway system alone is $23.2 billion annually, supporting more than 130,000 jobs. When this river chokes, the cost is not theoretical. In 2022, the last time the Mississippi system seized up from drought, ACU. Weather estimated $20 billion in total losses. 2,000 barges backed up. Round-trip transit time from New Orleans to Cairo doubled, from 14 days to 27. Grain shipments southbound collapsed by 79%. That was one autumn. This is now the 4th year in 5 that the system is broken down. Here is what no one is talking about. The infrastructure holding the Ohio River together is approaching 100 years old. The lock and dam system was completed in 1929. 20 facilities maintain a 9-foot minimum navigation depth across the entire river. Some components are so old that replacement parts are no longer manufactured. Gary Barge, operations manager at Markland Locks and Dam, told WCPO that most people do not realize how vital the locks and dams are to keeping commodities moving up and down the river. Fuel, chemicals, grain. All of it flows through gates that were engineered for a climate that no longer exists. And beneath the numbers, the human cost is accumulating quietly. In Northwest Ohio, soil moisture has dropped to roughly 20%. Normal is 40 to 50%. Aaron Wilson, the state climatologist at Ohio State University, called it an abysmal soil moisture recharge season. At research farms in Wood County, probes confirmed what farmers already knew. The ground is not holding water. Second cutting hay production fell to 25% of normal. Dairy and hog operations hauled thousands of gallons of water per week just to keep animals alive. Nick Eckel, an Ohio State Extension agent in Wood County, warned that without deep soil moisture, root systems cannot sustain crops through the growing season. The planting window is approaching, and the soil is empty. The NOAA Weather Prediction Center forecast 2 to 5 inches of rainfall across the Ohio Valley for mid-March 2026, and by March 10th, flows had already rebounded to 130% of normal. Indiana declared Severe Weather and Flood Preparedness Week. The spring outlook from the NOAA Climate Prediction Center favors above normal precipitation for the Ohio Valley through May. La Nina is fading. ENSO, neutral conditions are expected by spring, with El Nino development possible by summer. But here is what that relief actually means. Rain falling on soil that has been baked dry for months does not soak in. It runs off. It floods. The Army Corps of Engineers' own climate study for the Ohio River Basin projects that after 2040, fall minimum flows will drop by 25 to 35%, while spring peak floods intensify. Both extremes get worse. The cycle does not break. It tightens. In April 2025, the Ohio at Louisville crested at 36.63 feet. Normal pool is around 12 feet. Less than a year later, the same river was running at 5% of capacity. The swing between too much and too little is the new permanent condition, and the system built to manage it was designed for a river that no longer behaves this way. What happens to the 5 million people whose tap water comes from a river that oscillates between toxic algae during droughts and floodwater surges that push coal ash into aquifers? What happens to the $23 billion shipping corridor when the locks holding it together cannot get replacement parts? And what happens to a country whose food supply depends on a waterway that has failed 4 out of the last 5 years? The Ohio River is the largest tributary of the Mississippi. It feeds half the water in the most important commercial waterway on the continent. And right now, beneath the surface of a river that looks like it has recovered, the soil is still dry, the infrastructure is still aging, and the next drought is already building in the forecast models, pressing forward through data that most people will never see.